think we've pretty much covered this now.
Yeah, do you want to tell us about your top 5, James?
Yeah, so I made a list of the top 5 best of 4th edition books.
Sweet.
And it grew to be 10 books.
Of course it did. See, I remember that you were collecting these for years after the line was over.
So I actually
bargain basement collection.
Yeah, I actually have a massive old school D&D collection, especially because back during 4th edition, when everyone deserted it, all the stuff was really cheap. 5th edition rolled around, suddenly the books like tripled, quadrupled in price. But I managed to build up a pretty decent collection of old 3rd edition, 2nd edition, 1st edition stuff. And 4th edition, I believe, knock on wood, I believe I have every 4th edition book that was commercially released.
Woohoo!
I have most of the promotional books, I believe. So that's like the Adventurers League stuff and so on.
Yeah.
And honestly, most of it is just there to make my collection feel happy. But I decided I'd write a list of the top 5 best books, and I came to 10. And you know what? Just before this, I was trying to discuss with Claire, but could we cut this one? Should we cut this one? I'd really like to get it. You know what? Nah, stuff it. I'm going to do my top 10.
I never tried to commit you to 5, so no. I have no problem with this.
Yeah. And when I say top 10, it's actually more than 10.
This is peak James right here.
This is peak James, isn't it?
Wow.
So, in no particular order.
Okay.
My first one is Heroes of the Feywild. So, every year, they would release a new player's handbook or a new player's handbook look-alike thing. So the first couple of years, you had a new player's handbook that had new classes in them. And then later on, when they'd done all of the classes after Player's Handbook 3, you got Heroes of Shadow, the Feywild, the Elemental Chaos, the Underdark. Anyway, that had more specialised focuses. And of these, Heroes of the Feywild was by far my favourite. What did it have in it? It let you be a pixie. Pixies were rad. You were tiny, you could fly, you could ride on anything. It was the best. Claire, are you trying not to laugh?
James, I want to play 4th edition.
Literally any concept you could think of was better if you were actually a pixie.
I want to play 4th edition. I want to play it right now. Give me a character sheet. I'm rolling up a pixie.
Yeah. What sort of pixie would you be? Because any pixie is automatically the coolest thing ever.
It would have pink hair. It would always stand up.
Because...
And I'd have 2 daggers.
Being a rogue is cool. But imagine being a pixie rogue
Stabby
who's a
pixie.
pirate
Stabby pixie.
Has a pet turtle with a pirate ship on the back, and you ride your turtle and it's your pirate ship.
I am a stabby pink-haired pixie.
Imagine being a pixie who is a druid who can turn into a giant animal compared to you. I can't remember how you did it, but I remember there was a combo where you could turn from one pixie, you could turn into 100 pixies. I forget what you had to do, but there was, I think it was a druid, where it's like you turn into a swarm of things or something. And so, anyway, it was amazing. Pixies were great. You also had satyrs.
100 stabby pixies.
You had satyrs who were cool. You had hamadryads and...
Hamadryads?
H-A-M-A.
Hamadryads.
Well, they are now MC hamadryads.
Sure.
You had lots of cool new classes, like witches.
Right.
You had a new system for character creation, where instead of your basic pick a class, pick a race, pick a background, distribute your stats, you had a little pick-a-path adventure where you followed the origin story of your character through the Feywild and all their adventures, and you gradually picked up all your character details as you went.
Lit!
Heroes of the Feywild was... Oh, and the art had all these little stories. There were little sidebar boxes with little stories as well, describing fairy tales from the Feywild or adventures that people were having in the Feywild. Awesome book.
I'm
Brilliant
questioning
flavour.
my life choices for not having read this book yet.
It's really good. It's just a great book. Oh, this is also the one where you have a background where you can start off as a Feywild noble with a pet owlbear at level 1. You can have a pet owlbear or a pet displacer beast or something else that I don't remember right now.
Surely you can't follow this first entry up with something better, because this...
There's a reason why this is the first one that I thought of when I wrote this list.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the next one that I've got is actually 3 books, because that's me, right?
Oh, is it something to do with planes?
It is! It's the Planes Above, the Planes Below, and the Underdark. The Underdark was the first one that I thought of, but I wanted to add in the Planes Above and the Planes Below as well. 4th edition completely changed the cosmology to make everything more gameable.
Okay.
And so the Underdark, I remember I always thought the Underdark was really boring. So it's just a giant dungeon, basically. But this Underdark, when I read it, you get a double-page spread on this whole new area of the Underdark, and you turn the page of a whole new area. It divided into the top levels where it was more civilized, and the lower levels where it got more chaotic, and the bottom levels where the tortured and mangled body of a god who was crippled during the Dawn War drags his form through the caverns, creating the tunnels of the Underdark. Torog, the god of slaves. Isn't that the most metal origin story for the Underdark?
How did I not know any of this? This is amazing.
Meanwhile, Planes Above and Planes Below took a whole bunch of D&D concepts and just smushed them together to put them in their most gameable form. So Planes Above takes all the sort of heaven-like planes and smushes them together with the, the Astral Sea and Spelljammer to have floating islands of different heavens in a sea that you can only travel by flying spaceships, space sailing ships. But heaven is broken, souls aren't going where they need to go, the entire system of the afterlife is failing, and only very high-level adventurers can solve heaven. And finally, Planes Below took all the sort of evil planes and smushed them together with the elemental planes. The classic elemental planes are very ungameable because they're so pure, like the plane of fire is just fire. That's it.
Yeah.
The elemental chaos version of it from Planes Below is more like all the elements are happening at once and constantly colliding into each other. And so you've got air and earth and fire and water, and you can actually go there and run around and do things and meet things. And also the abyss is in here now, so the demons live here from a primal mote of chaos that was planted in the elements by a god who was driven insane by the far realms at the dawn of time. So I'm putting all of those together as one entry because what they are is they're the fluff books. There's very little mechanics in them. They are just classic D&D tropes reimagined for 4th edition in their most gameable form. The whole point of them is that you just open them up on literally any page and you will go, I want to game this.
So tasty.
It's so tasty. Speaking of most gameable forms, my next one we've already mentioned in a previous podcast. It's the Neverwinter campaign setting. So this is for the Forgotten Realms. The Forgotten Realms campaign setting was released early on for 4th edition, and I do not recommend it. The Neverwinter campaign setting was released very late on, and I recommend it heartily. So it describes the city of Neverwinter, which is the setting of several computer games. It does it by laying out a number of different factions and how they all interrelate to each other. It gives you stat blocks for a half dozen big bads, none of whom are higher than level 10. So the whole idea is that you can be starter characters and you can jump straight into big name regional stuff. You don't have to go, oh, there's a lich who's in this area, but I can't face them until I'm level 37. No, you can go straight to thwarting her schemes. And like I said, every one of these factions and players and power groups ties into all the other ones. And so it's really, really easy to see how you could do an adventure with, okay, so I'll focus it on this group, but that means that these 4 others are also interested in what's going on. Webs of intrigue.
Nice.
Also, it has background. Backgrounds are something that got introduced later on in 3rd edition, and they then got carried on to 5th edition. So traditionally a background is something like, I was a blacksmith before I became an adventurer. These ones are a little bit different, because they're not just specific to the setting, they are ultra specific to the setting. So you're not just I was a noble, you are I am the long-lost true heir to the throne of Neverwinter.
Ooh.
I am the last survivor of a clan of barbarians that was annihilated by unknown raiders, and also we are werewolves.
I freaking love this.
Every single one of these backgrounds is laser focused on giving you specific plot points, tying you into the factions and the settings, giving you something really cool that is unique to you. Obviously, you can't really have multiple people with the same backgrounds for these, because otherwise you've got an entire party who are the true heir to Neverwinter.
I like that.
Some of them you can more than others. But yeah, they give you cool abilities that tie you into the world, and you could pretty much just sit down at a table, everybody's made their characters, and you would have half a dozen plot threads that people would want to follow before the DM even started running the game.
I love it.
Yeah, so the Neverwinter campaign setting is possibly the most gameable campaign setting I've ever seen for focusing so tightly on one city and what you do there.
Nice.
And hey, having described how it's one of the best campaign settings I've ever seen, I'm going to follow up with one of the other best campaign settings I've ever seen. Dark Sun.
Oh, I didn't know they did 4th edition.
They did. And it was lit. So Dark Sun originally came around in 2nd edition because they wanted to do a miniature wargame world. And then the miniature wargaming side of it kind of dropped off along the way and it turned into Dark Sun. Dark Sun then sat out 3rd edition but came back heroically for 4th edition. And it's kind of the perfect encapsulation of what Dark Sun is all about. You've got your savage warriors, you've got your epic fighting, you've got... The world gets... All its meta plot gets wound back to the moment that everything kicks off. So one of the problems, if you listen to our earlier Dark Sun podcast, one of the problems we said was that Dark Sun very quickly had a meta plot which just destroyed the entire setting. This spins it back to the very first meta plot event has happened, which is one of the dragon princes. Haha, see where I got my inspiration from? One of the dragon sorcerer kings has just been overthrown. One of the cities is independent, and everyone else in the world is going, what? The city has also, as part of its revolution, decided to dispense with slavery. Everyone else in the world is going, what? And that's it. The timeline is frozen at that point. Which is a great idea. It takes a lot of the 4th edition ideas and bakes them in, but unlike the earlier Forgotten Realms campaign setting where they sort of forced some of those things in this case they're worked in really authentically. So concepts like the Dawn War, the war between the gods and the primordials, gets put in this case, in Dark Sun, the primordials, the elementals, won. The gods are all dead.
Oh, it's clever.
New races like the Dragonborn and the Eladrin got worked in a completely smooth way that felt like they'd been there already. There was already a group called the Drey who were sort of kind of ish dragon people. Dark Sun 4th edition said, those Drey, in other words, could be called Dragonborn. Done. Easy. Super simple. Meanwhile, I remember the Eladrin, who in other worlds are like these otherworldly princes and their fairy castles. The fairy realms are dying or dead. You are exiles from the land beyond the sky that may never return, like a mirage that's faded in the sun. It felt so natural and part of this world. It also changed around a lot of the mechanics for a lot of things to focus them on what would be the most fun at the table. So ideas like defiling, which is where you cast spells by sucking out the life force of the plants around you, before had been a purely negative thing. You did it because that was your class, and it had this nasty side effect. Now defiling was a way to anybody who could cast spells, arcane spells, could defile if they wanted to. But instead of drawing on plants, they would steal the life force of all the other players. Improvised weaponry that had been a thing in the previous campaign settings. Before that had just been a sort of a flavour thing. Now there were rules about how you could, if you had improvised weaponry, you could deliberately do a reroll of an attack roll, but your weapon would break. So rather than making it like a oh, your weapon is bad, it puts it on your court. Do you want to risk breaking your weapon? And the answer is yes, of course you want to risk breaking your weapon because it's cool and it's that way, rather than it being a punishment. The Dark Sun campaign setting and the creature catalogue that came with it, which gave really cool monsters and also stats for all the big bad NPCs, were just a really good encapsulation of all the themes of Dark Sun, everything it was about, boiled down into 2 books. And talking about monsters, my next ones are the Monster Vault and the Monster Vault Threats to the Nentir Vale. So the first couple of monster manuals were pretty good, though they did have some hilariously bad fluff in the early ones.
Oh no.
So what they would do was that they would have a little table that you would roll on to sort of see what you would know about the monsters. And for some of these monsters, it was hilariously bad. So, for example, if you were very good at your nature and you met a bear, you might know that bears like to attack with their claws.
I remember this.
Yeah. It became a meme.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, when Essentials rolled around, the monster manuals got revised and turned into monster vaults. The first monster vault was a big box set, big white box set. It redid all the stats for all the classic monsters with actual good proper fluff, with the good mechanics, with the fixed maths that actually worked, everything that you wanted to see. And with it, it had little pop-out pogs for every single monster.
Yeah.
Because if the game was telling you had to do it on a map with miniatures, this was the solution.
Yeah.
There was no more, I'm going to use these hobgoblins and this elf to stand in for kobolds because they're the miniatures I happen to pull from my box. You had all the miniatures that you needed now forever. If you wanted to spend money to upgrade it, cool, good for you. But this gave you a good, cheap, workable alternative that gave you everything in a box. It's a dead solid product. But I think that the second Monster Vault was even cooler.
Yeah.
Second Monster Vault was a slipcase around a paperback book, a sort of large-sized paperback book rather than the digest-sized one, and a bunch of pog sheets. And it was a stealth campaign setting.
Huh.
So what this one did is it took the implied campaign setting and it gave you a whole bunch of different villainous groups or monsters that could be found around them. And so you had, for example, you had the Iron Legion, who were these sort of warlords who were going to start invading. And so it had a bunch of stat blocks that were all of the same general level. So it was practically like a pre-baked adventure with all the monsters you'd need, all the ideas that you needed on how to use them. And so, yeah, it was much more specific. Rather than the stats for a dragon, you got the stats for the specific dragon that lived over here that was unique and an individual. And, yeah, all the pogs for all of them. So, yeah, both Monster Vaults. Wonderful, wonderful books. And while we're talking about specific locations, another set of smaller books that were released were about specific cool locations. I remember liking Hammerfast, which was about a city of dwarves that was also inhabited by ghosts. And so just ghosts and dwarves living everywhere. Oh, cool. I feel like there might also have been orcs living there as well. But the one that I thought was even cooler was Vorukoth, which was a ruined tiefling city of Baal Turath. And I was a big Mordheim player back in the day, where you had this big ruined city in Warhammer that you could explore. And this was basically the same idea. This was the jewel in the crown. I believe, it's been a while since I looked at this one, I believe this was the city where the tieflings made the deal to sell their entire race of souls to the devil.
Right.
And the gate that they used is still somewhere in that city.
Ooh.
And so now there's all these different factions who are going through it and tearing through the wreckage. I loved it. It was so evocative and cool, and just a really cool adventure setting. There's a part of me that feels like the best thing you could do with 4th edition is turn it into a miniature war game. And if you were going to do it, this is where you would want to set it. My next 2 recommendations are adventures.
Oh, yeah?
Yep.
I have a feeling you've told me about these ones before.
I've told you about these ones before.
And
yeah.
I really want to play them.
Yep. Both of these are... I haven't played them, but they look like some of the coolest adventures that have ever been released for Dungeons & Dragons in any edition.
Ooh.
Which is pretty high praise.
Hot take.
Yeah. And of course, both of them came out at the end of 4th edition. The early adventures, as I said before, are Drek. Avoid at all costs. But Madness at Gardmore Abbey and Reavers of Harkenwald are rock-solid concepts. In Madness of Gardenmore Abbey, you are in a ruined monastery that used to belong to paladins that was created to safeguard an item too dangerous to be let loose in the world. The Deck of Many Things. The coolest of all magical items. We all know it's the coolest item, right? But the problem with the Deck of Many Things is that you get it, you pull a card from it, and that's kind of it. What can you do to make it really cool? Well, this is what you can do to make it cool. Because all the monsters have split the Deck of Many Things up into its constituent pieces. And so you have one of 4 possible patrons who has hired you to go into these ruins and reassemble the Deck of Many Things.
It's like Cardcaptor Sakura meets, I don't know, Castlevania or something. Yep.
So this was done with much more of a sandbox tendency. So it describes sort of the giant set-piece fight against the orcs at the gate, and then says, or you could negotiate with them. Here's what they're interested in. There's many different factions who are inhabiting the ruins, and all of them have been sort of warped by whatever cards they have. So if they've got a particular card, they're now displaying its powers. Yeah, so you had to run around in the ruins and negotiate with people, or fight people, or trick people, or explore, find all the cards, reassemble the Deck of Many Things, and then, of course, your ultimate reward, once you had put the whole thing together, was that you would get to draw a card and hope you don't get that card that automatically kills you. Hope you get the one that gives you the wish instead. But that's the fun of the Deck of Many Things. Would you pull a card? It could do anything.
You know what you do?
Yeah.
You pull a card. Fade to black. The end. That's it. That's the end. That's the end of the campaign.
It would be, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Because the promise is better than the delivery.
Exactly, yeah.
And that's why I think the coolest thing with the Deck of Many Things is this find all 52 cards, or 54 cards, or however many there are in a Deck of Many Things. Find all the cards, put them back together. Because that's all about the hunt, all about those possibilities. So much better than actually pulling a card from the Deck of Many Things. The other one is a much more low-key, low-level adventure. Actually, Madness at Gardenmore Abbey is only about level, 6 to 10? So it's, it's medium. It's not, it's not like a level 30 adventure or anything. Reeves of Harkenwald, on the other hand, I believe is for level, 2 to 4? Okay. In it, you go to the pleasant little valley of Harkenwald to find that it has been taken over by evil mercenaries, and now you've got to Robin Hood that place up. The author played with these sorts of tropes in different places. He played with the idea that there's more fantasy tropes than just the kick in the door and go explore the location. And so in this one, you've got to run around, you've got to sabotage the defences, make alliances, deal with the different allies, and liberate Harkenwald from its oppressors. It's just such a cool premise. It's the sort of thing, I believe it had been done before in a slightly different angle in Red Hand of Doom and in Shadowdale something of the something. Anyway, he'd played with this concept a few times, but it's a golden concept. It's a very different sort of D&D adventure. And so it basically, rather than having one big adventure, it breaks it into a whole bunch of little mini adventures where you'd have 2 or 3 encounters for the entire adventure to solve one little arm of what you could do as you work towards. Finally, of course, your troops will, in the big set-piece battle, confront their troops in a big battle to liberate the village, and then you've got to enter the castle where their leader is and overthrow them. Anyway, my final recommendations are slightly more prosaic after those ones, actually. I should have structured this better for ending on a high note.
Oh, how appropriate to structure your 4th edition thing badly.
No, my final recommendation is actually the Dungeon Master Guides. Both the Dungeon Master Guides.
What an anticlimax!
So the Dungeon Master Guide 1 is just you should check it out. It's a good book. It's got some good guides, good tips about what to do. It's solid advice, no matter what edition you're playing. It's got the entire Nentia Vale campaign setting as an appendix at the back, which is, again, solid. It then has a little adventure about one tiny little dungeon in there, which you should just ignore completely because it's awful, because this was early adventure design for 4th edition. Dungeon Master Guide 2 is where it's at. Dungeon Master Guide 2 is the best book of Dungeon Master advice I've read.
Like, ever?
Ever. Any edition.
Wow.
It is so rock solid.
Wow.
So for it, particularly the first chapter, there's a lot of cool stuff after that about using different terrains, cool rules for traps. Sigil, the city in Planescape, fully written up in its only post-second edition canon appearance. So, spoilers for stuff that you're not supposed to know about, Claire. There is a meta plot going on in Planescape. You will get to explore that. And the meta plot was meant to go places, but the line got cancelled before they could resolve it. So imagine if Star Wars had ended at the end of Empire Strikes Back. So the end of Planescape kind of blows up the setting a little bit. And every appearance since then, people tend to just go back to how it looked at the beginning of 2nd edition. Except in this book, where they actually fully detail what Sigil is like now that all of that stuff has happened. But that's not what we're here to talk about for the Dungeon Master Guide 2. This is all just extra window dressing on an excellent book, because the first chapter is just full of tips about how to run a really good Session 0. You know, there's so many tips about Session 0s and how you should cover what the party doesn't want to do, but this has good tips about what the party does want to do, how to build relationships between the parties, how to do flashback scenes, or how to... I can't even remember all the stuff that's in it. There is so much good advice in this book. They got Robin D. Laws, who is a slightly more indie game designer, who also wrote excellent things like Hillfolk or Hamlet's Hit Points. Have you not heard of Hamlet's Hit Points, Claire?
How have I not heard of this?
It's his book where he breaks down the narrative structures of classic stories. So he does Hamlet and Dr. No. He breaks it down, and then he uses that to reflect on what we should be doing for narrative structure in role-playing games.
I see.
So yeah, they get him in, and he gives all this sort of indie advice for running a D&D game. It's really good advice. I strongly recommend the Dungeon Master Guide 2. It's brilliant. I feel like looking at it again right now. More than all the other books here, that's the one that I feel like I could do with a read through now, regardless of what game I run next, whether we finish off my D&D game that's stalled or whether we do a fiasco for people. That's the book that's going to help me no matter what I'm doing.
Cool.
And that's 4th edition.
Oh, we're over.
We're over.
That was an epic episode, James.
It was an epic episode.
I feel very nostalgic.
I feel massive nostalgia right now. I would love to go back and do another 4th edition at some point.
Okay.
And I know one of our things we've been talking about doing, when we've got some spare time, inviting friends over to try some of our different systems that we've got. So maybe that would be a good time to do a Return to 4th edition one-off. So, what did you think about 4th edition? Were you one of the many, many, many people who either got turned away by how horrible it looked when it came out, or who actually gave it a shot and then got turned away again?
Were you a rube like me and didn't know any better?
Were you like me and got won over despite yourself by how excellent the final year of 4th edition was? Oh, one other thing actually. Jeez. I have heard that 4th edition has a retro clone already.
What?
Yep. I've heard that some of its designers, after it ended, started a retro clone, and I've only ever heard good things about it.
Huh.
I haven't got the retro clone because
cool.
I own too many things, as it is. But it's called 13th Age.
Ah, yep.
And if I were to get it, it would probably be in conjunction with 13th Age Glorantha, their love letter to my favourite game designer of all time. So yeah, I've heard if you like 4th edition and you want to check out what it should have been all along, that's what to look at. Or check out some of those last years worth of stuff that I've just been rattling off that felt like way more than 10 things. Well, it is me. Well, that's us.
Have you got any plugs, James?
Coming up soon, we have Convergence in Hamilton, where I am going to be running my adventure that I've been working on for the last little while, The Fall of the House of Dallasquama.
Whoop whoop.
Woo-woo! I have been really hard at work on this. It's a very non-traditional adventure, featuring incredibly low-powered PCs with massive social resources. Yeah, it's a strange game. So come check it out.
Yeah, Convergence.
I'll be running my game on the Saturday.
21st of August.
But you can come say hi to me on the Sunday as well. I will probably be there both days. I'm looking forward to trying some other games too while I'm down there, trying out some new things. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
Check out the Kickstarter for Her Gentle Highness, which is still going on for another 2.5 weeks on Kickstarter. Check it out.
It's a really fun game, and you can play the demo online, which will give you a feel for what it's like. It's really funny, great art, great music, great writing.
Thanks.
Anyway, that's us.
Bye!
And keep gaming.